good morning, everybody, and welcome again. My name is Greg Giamalva. I'm the lead pastor here. You know, one of the things that blows me away every single week is just all the new faces of people that come to church and check us out. And so if for some reason you are new here or you've been just checking us out, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. It does mean a lot to us that you would come and give a piece of your Sunday to State Line Church to check out this church. We really are just a group of imperfect people chasing after a perfect Jesus. That's what we're all about here, and so everybody's welcome, and I hope you could say at the end of your journey and you're into checking this place out that you'd say it just feels like home. We want it to feel like home. So summer's upon us, summer's over, I should say, and school is upon us. How many of you guys have started school? Kids have started school. How many are starting school this week? All right, families starting school this week. All right, hopefully you got your vacation in as we're starting to wind back into the fall mode and school mode. My wife and I just got back from Florida this last week. We took our kids down there, and unfortunately, there was something called red tide. You guys familiar with the red tide? And so there was like this algae bloom in the water, and you couldn't even go close to the ocean. So it's Florida. We found other things to do, and we got to stay at a friend's house. It was all good. But a couple weeks before that, we had the opportunity to be in Hawaii, and some of you are like, this guy traveled coast to coast. I know, blessed. We were lucky to be able to do it. And we were in Hawaii, and Hawaii was awesome. It's exactly what you think it is. I had never been. It's a tropical island. And so one of the things that we got to do when we were there, and we were with some friends, and it was my wife and I, is they got to do a helicopter tour. And they, got to go explore the entire island. Now, I'll just let you into a little secret. I did not want to do the helicopter tour. I was scared to do the helicopter tour. They kept asking me all week, do you want to do it? Are you sure you don't want to do the helicopter tour? Are you sure you want to take a pass on this? And I kept saying, I'm good. No, I'm good, which is dude speak for I'm scared. I'm terrified. No, I'm good. And so I'd love to be able to tell you right now that I conquered my fears and I got on that helicopter. I did not. They took the helicopter ride, and I decided, you know what? I'll go to Starbucks, because no one's ever been there before. I'll go to Starbucks, and I'll just read a book, and that's what I'll do, and they can do them, and I'll do me, and it'll all be good. So I go to Starbucks, and I'm like sitting outside. I'm like, hey, I'm in Hawaii, and it starts downpouring on me while I'm trying to read my book at Starbucks. So I'm like, I'll just go inside. I'll read my book. I sit down. It's a little crowded. I sit at like a coffee rail, and this guy comes in, and he sits down right next to me. Now, hey, look, I'm for all people, but this dude was a little on the smelly side, and he started making a bunch of weird noises from weird body parts, okay? Sitting right next to me, and I couldn't help but have this thought. Right now, my friends and my wife are flying in a helicopter over a tropical island looking at waterfalls and volcanic craters, and here I am stuck at a Starbucks, soaking wet, next to a grocery store, sitting next to Stinkopotamus over here. So needless to say, I missed out. I absolutely missed out because of something as silly as fear, because I'm afraid of heights. So here's the moral of the story. Fear is a powerful emotion, and fear will cause you to miss out on opportunities in life. Fear will cause you to miss out on moments in your life. Fear will make you think you're playing it safe, but in reality, you're playing it boring. Because there's always a cost to fear. There's always a trade-off when it comes to our fears. And so as you're wrestling with your fears, you have to evaluate, is it worth the price you're going to have to pay? If you let your fear win, is it worth the trade-off? Because like I said, there's always a cost. So let me ask you a few questions as we get started this morning. How many things have you missed out on because of fear? How many things in your life or in your story have gone unaccomplished because of fear? And why is it that we give so much influence to fear in our lives to begin with? Now, did you know that there are actually only two fears that we're born with? The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, which means every other fear we have is learned. We learn these fears from outside influences. We learn these fears from culture. We may learn them from the neighbor down the street, right? But every other fear we have is learned. Like when I was a kid, I learned that clowns were evil, because I saw a movie called Poltergeist. Now, I do not recommend seeing this movie. I definitely do not recommend letting your kids see this movie. Okay, way to go, Mom. Way to go, Dad. Okay, so I see Poltergeist, and there's a scene in this movie where a clown comes to life and chokes a little boy. Now, my mom thought it was a good idea for me to have a velvet clown painting that hung over my bedroom, in my bedroom. True story. So at night, I was a good Catholic kid. I'd do the sign of the cross on that sucker. I'd hang a rosary on the clown picture because there was no way that clown was coming to life and it was going to get me. I was absolutely terrified of clowns. Still to this day, I see a clown, and some of you are the same way. I'm like, there's a story behind that mask. There's something going on there. It's just creepy. This was a learned fear, all right? It was something that was put upon me. And this is what's crazy, though, about our fears, is we let things that we learn from unreliable sources, things we learn from culture, like I said, maybe things we learn from our neighbor kid, they alter, once we learn them, the way we live our lives. When we learn these fears, they alter the way we interact with other people. They alter the decisions and the choices that we make, which in turn causes us to miss out on opportunities, to miss out on moments, and potentially miss out on God's best for our life because of a learned emotion, because of something we picked up on from outside cultural pieces or outside sources. And it makes you think, well, isn't that kind of dumb? When you think about how much influence fear has and then you realize the root of it. And so we're starting this brand new series this morning. Tyler already made allusion to it. It's called People of the Fine Print. And scattered all throughout the Bible, there are stories of men and women who essentially had to do one thing: walk in faith. And to walk in faith, that means you have to conquer your fears. By proxy, faith means you have to walk into the unknown. By proxy of faith, that means there has to be the existence of doubt. And the Bible is just littered with stories of people, men and women, who were not afraid, willing to live bold because they knew who their God was. And so we read these stories, we go to the Bible because it encourages us. It gives us hope, it gives us excitement, it gives us energy. These stories build our faith. The Bible tells us in Romans 10 that faith comes through the hearing of the Word of God. And we see as we read these stories that with God all things are possible. But because there are so many stories in the Bible, it's easy to miss some, isn't it? There are 3,237 mentioned named people in the Bible. Now, most of us, as we sit here, we're like, I can think of 5. I've heard of Jesus and Abraham, right? We can think of a few. So over the course of this series, for the next 3,237 weeks, we're going to hit every single one. You got to keep coming back. I kid. Some of you are like, that would be awful. Especially because there's some people in there that there's not a lot about them. But this week, we're going to focus on one of these people, and his name is Benaiah. How many of you have heard of Benaiah in the Bible? Perfect, a few of you. Good. All right, so here we go. Now, I had not known much about Benaiah up until just a few years back. A guy by the name of Mark Batterson actually wrote a book about Benaiah, and I had probably read his narrative a few times and had just skipped over it because I just figured, it's just fine print, right? You just easily miss these stories. And then he writes this book called In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, and then I studied the life of Benaiah and just realized that this is a pretty fascinating story here. And so we're going to jump into the fine print, 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 20. There was also Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant warrior from Kabzeel. He did many heroic deeds, which included killing 2 champions of Moab. Another time, on a snowy day, he chased a lion down into a pit and killed it. Once, armed only with a club, he killed a great Egyptian warrior who was armed with a spear. Benaiah wrenched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with it. Deeds like these made Benaiah as famous as the 3 mightiest warriors. He was more honored than the other members of the 30, though he was not one of the 3. And David, this is King David, this is the guy who killed Goliath, he's now the king of Israel. It says David made him captain of his bodyguard. So just a little background here that we can pick up on from Benaiah. He is one of David's mighty men. And if you don't know what one of the mighty men were, essentially the way to parallel that would be a Navy SEAL. They were the elite fighting force. So he is one of the elite soldiers in the army. And he goes on to become captain of King David's bodyguard, which this is a premier position in the kingdom. And King David was a revered king. A king that was so famous and everyone loved him, and he was the man who was in charge of keeping him safe. And then if you read on a little bit more about his life, you see that he actually becomes King Solomon, who's David's son. He becomes King Solomon's commander-in-chief of King Solomon's entire army. So he becomes the general over the entire forces. Some people believe at that point it was about 800,000 men. Now you got to think that when David is sifting through applications to find the bodyguard for his protective services, you'd have to think that Benaiah's application and resume would stand out a little bit here. I mean, right in his resume, it would say that he took a dude's own weapon and killed the dude with it. Guys, that's swagger. All right, he's like, I'm going to take that and kill you with it. Right? That's bold. That's cocky. But there is one thing on his resume, something in the fine print of the Bible here that really, really, really jumps off the page. This guy chases a lion, into a pit on a snowy day and kills it. Now, sometimes we hear these stories and we have what's called hindsight bias, which means because we know it's in the Bible, we already know that it happened, so we forget that it's awesome that this guy actually did this, that this actually happened. Can you put yourself into this scenario? Put yourself into this story for a minute. The natural tendency when one sees a lion is to turn and run in the opposite direction, right? Right? Some of you, if you see a bug, will turn and run in the opposite direction. At my house, when someone sees a bug, you will hear squeals and people running away. That's usually for me. Okay, I do not like bugs. They freak me out. And so if we're scared of bugs, now imagine being scared of a lion. That makes sense because a lion with a single bite could crush your skull. They have claws that could rip you to shreds. They can run 35 miles per hour. That's fast, okay? They can jump 30 feet and they weigh over 500 pounds. So to fear a lion is justified. This is a wise fear. This is one of those fears that makes sense. It's like being afraid of a burglar with a gun. It's like, yeah, that makes sense, right? So to fear a lion is normal because normal people do not chase lions. Normal people run away from them. But I want you to notice that Benaiah doesn't just run away, he runs after the lion. The Bible actually says he chased it. So somehow the lion comes up on him, and he's like, oh, no, you didn't. Lion, I'm going to come after you. And he starts running after the lion on a snowy day. They fall into a pit, and he still keeps going. Now, I don't care what kind of North Face he had on. All right, I don't care if dude is rocking Puma snowshoes, pun intended, on sheer size, strength, and speed. The lion wins every single time. Now, my wife, Andrea, and I, we had a cat for a very short season of my life. It was a dark time. Yeah, it was a rough season. We're not cat people, but we did have a cat. And my wife, Andrea, had this little shelf full of knickknacks. Do you guys know what knickknacks are? Yeah, this is worthless stuff, okay? So she had a little shelf full of worthless things. And the cat, though, I would love to watch this cat because it would jump up onto the shelf and it would glide around these knickknacks. And it was actually pretty amazing because it wouldn't even bump them. It wouldn't even move them. It would just go in and out because cats are graceful. Cats have amazing balance and dexterity. Now, humans, on the other hand, maybe not so much. Now, I know you look at me and you think, that man is graceful. That man can probably dance. That man's got rhythm. That man's got soul. There's something about that man. Now, I know. But here's the truth. I can't dance. I have no rhythm, and I'm anything but graceful. I trip on flat ground, people, all the time. Did anyone else trip on flat ground? I'll trip on flat ground, and I'll look at the ground like it did something, like it jumped up and grabbed my phone. I'm like, what did you do that for? I bump into walls. The wall's been there. I've seen it, and I know the wall's there, and I hit glass. I am not graceful. People aren't that graceful. And so here's the thing. Why give the cat an extra advantage and fight it in the snow in a pit in the ground? Doesn't make any sense. But can you see the Hollywood moment where Benaiah locks eyes with the lion? His vision is now blurred by the snow. In the distance, he hears the lion roar. They charge each other. As Benaiah is running full speed, he realizes there's no turning back now. He moves into a sprint as the lion bears down on him. He jumps, and there's a moment where they collide. It feels like he ran into a wall. A wrestling match casts the lion into a pit. This is Benaiah's moment to run away, but instead, Benaiah stares down the lion and does the unexpected. He jumps into the pit. The fight continues. He could feel the hot and blood-tainted breath of the lion, and with a swift, skilled strike, blackout, he's battered, but stands victorious. Wow. That's a crazy story. That's an awesome story. That's a fearless story. Who doesn't want to live like that? And it begs the question, why would anyone do this? Maybe he had a death wish. Maybe he didn't like cats. Maybe he was having a bad day. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew that instead of running away from his fears, he had to defeat them. Like I said earlier, normal people, they don't chase lions. And normal people, they don't chase after their fears. But because of that, normal people tend to die with regret. Normal people don't tend to inspire others. Normal people will miss out on their passion. Normal people will miss out on their purpose and will miss out on their calling because normal people will trust their fears more than they trust God. And this is why God doesn't want us to be normal people. God has called us out to be abnormal people, to stand up and stand firm for him, to live by faith, to do amazing things because we trust that he is God and he can do what he said he can do. And Benaiah was just a guy, but he was a guy who was willing to face his fears. And instead of running away from them, he would run towards them. He chased them down and he didn't just let them live, he killed them, he ended them. And because he was a guy who was willing to live fearlessly, he got one of the most honored positions in the entire kingdom, captain of the king's bodyguard, and went on to become head of all of Solomon's armies. And you have to understand something about Benaiah. Benaiah's dad was Jehoiada. Jehoiada was a priest. He grew up in the home of a priest, and he knew that God had a plan for his life. He knew that God was a provider. He knew that God would take care of them. He knew that God was real. He grew up with this reality under this umbrella, with this home, but he also knew that he could take the easy path. He could be average if he wanted to, but he wanted something different. He wanted to be meaningful. He wanted to leave a mark. He wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted to be significant. He had a call. He had a dream. He knew that God had a plan for his life, but this path to being heroic, this path to being known, this path to being meaningful would come by being bold, by being courageous, by being willing to take chances. And these qualities, if you were to write a job description for captain of the king's bodyguard, and you'd say, these are the qualities needed, right? These are the necessary skills. These are the necessary traits needed to be captain. You would say bold, fearless, courageous, right? Willing to take chances. This is exactly what you're looking for. And oftentimes we think these characteristics will just show up when we get the job description that matches it. But that's not true. So often, character does not come with position. It comes in the times when we're in a pit, when we're facing our fears, when no one else is around, when we have to make the right choices, when we have to do the hard thing, because you grow your character when you're in the struggle. Your character grows when you're in the fight, when no one's around to celebrate you and be like, way to go, you're doing so good. A lot of times character is formed in the dark, when you're willing to take a stand because you know and trust that God has called you to do it. I think of a butterfly, maybe a silly analogy, but you all went to school, so you understand butterfly. It's a caterpillar, and it goes into a cocoon, and there's this moment right before it does what it's been put on this earth to do, which is fly, be a butterfly. There's a struggle, right? It has to fight to break free from the cocoon. And you could come and you could cut the cocoon open and you could let the butterfly free, but then it would die. It wouldn't be able to fly. It wouldn't be able to do what it was put on this planet to do because it's the struggle, it's the fight, it's facing the darkness, it's facing the fears that's necessary for the butterfly to have strength, to be able to do what it was put on this planet to do. And Benaiah was the type of guy who's willing to fight. He was willing to struggle. And it didn't just give him his dream job. It also got him written into the fine print of the Bible, which is pretty cool. But I have to wonder that if he didn't live courageously, if he didn't take chances, if he wasn't bold, and he missed out on the opportunity, or maybe even worse yet, he got the opportunity, but he didn't have the character to stay in that opportunity, and he lost it, if he'd always regret what could have been. In the same way for all of us, scattered all throughout this room, there's stories, there's hopes. Sitting in these chairs, there's dreams, there's aspirations, there's ambitions all throughout this room. And we know that if we're going to do something meaningful, there is a path to being average. We can stay comfortable, but we know if we're going to do something meaningful with our one and only life, it's going to take courage. It's going to take boldness. It might take sacrifice. It might be a fight. It might be a struggle. And as we look at the cost, what happens is fear settles into our story. And we begin to second guess ourselves, don't we? Because we're all human, right? We all struggle with fear, and we begin to say, well, I don't know if I can do that. Or I don't know if God's really calling me to do that. I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know if I'm up for it. I don't know if I'm ready for that. And because fear sets in, we give fear all of the stock, all of the credibility, and we put all our hope and our trust in the fear. And I truly believe as you're sitting here right now, and if you're letting fear get the best of you, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point, you will regret missing out on that opportunity. Because fears left alive will always lead to regret that kills. Fears left alive will always lead to regret that kills. There's actually a joint study done on regret by two different professors. It was a Cornell social psychologist by the name of Tom Gilovich and a Northwestern professor by the name of Victoria Medvik. Now, they identified that there's essentially two different types of regret that people struggle with. The first type of regret is called action regret. These are the regrets that you have for the things you did but wished you hadn't. These are the bad decisions you make. These are the mistakes you make. This is eating one too many tacos last night, right? I shouldn't have done that. Like I got the indigestion. I shouldn't have eaten that much, right? These are regrets for mistakes, bad choices, actions. The second type of regret are called inaction regrets. These are the regrets you have for things you did not do but wished you had. These are your missed moments. These are the chances lost. And what the study did is it looked at that two different periods of life. In the short term of life, as it surveyed people, even people within the last week, the respondents were basically evenly split between those who regretted their actions, 53%, to 47% of those who regretted their failure to act. So almost a coin flip between those who regretted action versus inaction. But this is where the survey gets interesting. When asked what they regret more over the course of a lifetime, a significant majority, 84%, regret the inactions of their life. So essentially, what the study says is that our mistakes and actions may trouble us initially, but it's our inaction that plagues us the most over the long term. It's our feelings of regret that come up from opportunities missed that tend to haunt us, which means we will get over our mistakes, but we don't get over opportunities lost. And when we reflect back on our life, one of the main things that will go through our mind is, why didn't I take more chances? Why was I so afraid? Neil Rose, he's a psychologist, he wrote a book on regret. He said it like this: when we look back at our lives as a whole, we are most haunted by things we left undone, romantic opportunities untried, career changes unexplored, friendships left untended. So the first suggestion is simply to act. So what's your lion? What's the thing that's holding you back from going after that dream? What's that thing that you know God's maybe calling you to do or asking you to do, but you're afraid? Maybe it's something physical like heights or social settings or small spaces, and you just can't seem to get past it. It feels like it has its grip on you. Maybe your fear is the fear of the unknown. You have a fear of the future, and it just seems to paralyze you, and you're afraid to make the wrong choice or to take a misstep. Maybe you're simply afraid to fail, and you don't know if you could go through failure one more time. Maybe you're afraid of your thoughts or your feelings or your emotions, and so you bottle them up or try to ignore them, but they're really, really making you struggle. Maybe you're afraid you won't fit in. Maybe you're afraid of getting rejected, and so you don't act like yourself. Or you're making bad choices to try to fit in with a certain group, even though you know it's not best for you. Maybe you're afraid to get close to someone, and so you're keeping people at arm's length, but you're feeling isolated and alone. Maybe you're afraid of starting over with something new, a new job, a new plan, a new career change, a new school, a new college, whatever it is. And you're afraid of what that newness will look like. And so because you're afraid of starting something new, maybe you're settling for something less. Settling for less than because it's safe and it's comfortable. Maybe you're afraid of the diagnosis, the bills, the stress, the tornado of life. You feel like you're just caught up in this storm. The winds are blowing you all over the place, and you don't know where you're going to land. And you're just afraid. Maybe you're called by God to do something, and you just don't know if you have what it takes. And maybe a fear that sometimes doesn't get recognized as much as it should. Maybe you've grown up in church. Maybe you've been coming to church for a long time, and you're afraid to truly surrender your life to Jesus because you don't know what the cost will be. You don't know if you have what it takes. You don't know if Jesus really wants you, or maybe you're afraid of what others will think. And so you've been keeping Jesus himself at arm's length. Well, regardless of what your fear is, you have to decide if you're going to keep making excuses for that fear or if you're going to simply at some point get so fed up with that fear, you get tired of that lion roaring in your life that you decide to act. I want you to notice that Benaiah did not have optimum conditions to chase his lion. He was in a pit in the snow. He was outmatched. He was in the lion's territory, but it didn't matter. He had to go face his fears where his fears were at, but he didn't make excuses. He could have whined and complained that his fears were there. Could have said, oh man, this lion's there, oh bummer. He could have wished really hard that the lion would just go away. He could have said that the lion wasn't that big of a deal. Could have made excuses for it. He could have said, tomorrow will be a better day. It won't be so snowy tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a better day to fight my lion. But he simply decided to act. Why? Because he wouldn't let his lion get the best of him. And many of us may have bad situations. We may have tough circumstances that will make facing our lions hard. I don't want to diminish that. Sometimes it's hard. But you can keep making excuses, but the lion won't go away. You can say, well, I've learned to cope with my lion, but you have to understand something about lions. At some point, a lion will do what a lion does, and it will come after you because there's always a cost to our fears. There's always a trade-off. You're always giving up something to keep that fear in its place. And this is why God doesn't give us any wiggle room when it comes to living and navigating our fears. Look at what he says in 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. God knows that fear is going to hurt us and it's going to harm us. It's not part of his plan. Instead, because God said, I haven't given you this spirit, he gives us a different one. He gives us the spirit of power, of a sound mind, so you can walk in strength, you can walk in faith, you can walk in courage, you can be bold because you have God in you. We so often live as victims and we forget that the victory of Jesus is already in us. We have his victory. We have his power. We have his Holy Spirit in us so that we could face our fears. Because fear is not from his kingdom. It's not in his will. It's not part of his game plan. God didn't give fear to us. So it does beg the question, well, where does then fear come from? 1 Peter 5:8, stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Well, it says right here that fear is the tool of the enemy. Fear is the tool of the devil. And what this verse basically shows us is that there is a lion out there, but there is a catch. It says he goes around like a lion. He isn't a lion. So his tool is not his fangs, it's his roar. And when he roars and we get scared, his biggest game plan, his biggest victory in your life is to get you to stop doing what God's called you to do. Because when he roars, it's the fear that rises up in us that gets us to stop. In the cinematic masterpiece, circa 1991, Point Break, you didn't expect a Point Break quote today, but you're going to get it. Patrick Swayze says, I love this. This guy was wise. Fear causes hesitation. Hesitation causes your worst fears to come true. That's wise, Patrick Swayze. That's wise. Here's the thing. Fear will cause you to stop. That's what fear does. To stop chasing your dreams, stop chasing your purposes, stop taking chances. It causes you to stop. It paralyzes you, which causes you then to miss opportunities. And it's when you miss out because of your fears that your fears have come true, that your fears are now winning, because there's always a cost to our fear. So the key to chasing your fear is to be more afraid of what happens if you leave it alive. To be more afraid of the cost, the price that you pay if you let your fear continue to roar in your life. Because what are you really missing out on? What is the cost? Do you want to pay that price? I have to believe that Benaiah was scared of the lion, but he was more afraid of what would happen if he didn't chase it down and he left it alive. And it's in the moments when we're overwhelmed by our fears that we have to remember something that's really important. God is awesome. And God is bigger and stronger than any of our fears. And he promises us that he will be with us, that there is nothing with more power on this planet than him. So that's why we can stand firm. That's why we can be strong in our faith, because of who's with us. Because there is a real lion out there. God is the real lion. He's the Lion of Judah. And the more and more real the big lion becomes in your life, the smaller the phony other lions become, because you're putting your hope and trust in him in him alone. That's why the number one command in the Bible is to fear not. Did you know that? Fear not is the number one command in the Bible. I think sometimes we think it's like do not dance or do not cuss or do not do something bad. No. The number one command in the Bible is don't be afraid. Number one command, don't be afraid. Why? Because fear will make you forget that God is on your side. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Isaiah 41:10, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. Whose victorious right hand? God's. He'll hold you up. Isaiah 43, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. For I am the Lord, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Boom. That's awesome. God can be trusted. And when you walk with God, you don't have to walk with your fears. And because of what Jesus did for us on the cross, he went to the cross, 1, to kill sin, 2, to kill death, and 3, to eliminate the power of the enemy. Fear doesn't have a hold on you anymore, only if you let it. He killed and conquered all of that. He ended that on the cross. He put his power into you when you surrender your life to him, which means you have the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords on your side. You have the defender, the fighter, the champion on your side. You have the biggest friend in the fight who has your back. Now, when I was a kid, I know this will come as a shock to many of you. When I was a kid, I might have had a little bit of a big mouth that could have put me in some precarious positions every once in a while. But I was a little bit on the bold and cocky side because I had big friends. And having big friends is a big advantage because you can get away with saying some things that you probably shouldn't say when you know who has your back. And here's the truth. When you know God has your back, you can be bold. You can be cocky in Christ, if that's even a thing. I just made that up. Sure it is. Why not? You can be courageous. You can walk fearless because you know who has your back. Because if God is for you, who can be against you? Nothing. Nothing can be against you. It was kind of funny listening to my kids talk to each other sometimes. And Luke, he's my 4-year-old. He's a little bit more on the fearful side, and he gets afraid of a lot of different things. He's always scared to go downstairs in the basement to go get something. He's afraid of the dark. And so he'll always say to Jack, who's the older brother, he'll say, Jack, will you go downstairs with me? I'm scared to go downstairs. And Jack gets kind of annoyed with him. And he goes, Lukey, Jesus will go with you. Gosh. So he has to work on empathy, so that's his thing. He's a little bold, but he's not the most tender-hearted kid. But it's funny, out of the mouth of babes, he's so right that Jesus will go with him. And I'm like, thank you, State Line Kids, for raising and helping teach our kids good principles that they need to know. And it's true. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, God will go with you. So if you're trapped in a bad situation, he's your deliverer. If you're feeling like you're lost and you don't know what to do, he's your guide. If you're feeling like you're weak, he can be your strength. If you feel like you're alone, he can be a friend that sticks closer than a brother. He can be your companion. If you're in some type of jeopardy, he becomes your protector. If you're sick or in pain, he's your comforter. God is with you. I want you to pick up one more thing from the story of Benaiah. The Bible doesn't tell us how he killed the lion. It just says that he did. And I wonder, because it's in the fine print of the Bible, that it's just assumed that God helped him kill it. Obviously, God's calling was on his life. God's favor was on his life. His dad was a priest. He knew the truths, that God would always be with him no matter what he did, no matter what risks he took. He knew that. And here's the reality. When we take steps of faith, or take steps or risks because of our faith, God will always be with us and will go with us, and he will show up. There are things that begin to happen in our lives when we're bold that don't happen when we're comfortable. There's things that happen in our lives when we're courageous that don't happen when we're afraid. We open up the door to God's supernatural power. Some of us are like, I want to see God's supernatural power. Well, you're not doing anything worthy of it. Like, you got to be willing to take a risk for God's supernatural power to show up. Like, in your comfort, like when you're watching Netflix on the lazy boy, what do you want God to do? right? How do you want God to show up? You have to be willing to take a chance, to chase your fears and take risks for God. And when we live in courage, it always shows off the power and the reality of who Jesus is in our lives. Look what was said about Peter and John in Acts chapter 4 when they were on trial for talking about the resurrection of Jesus, and they wouldn't shut up. They wouldn't stop talking about it. Everybody had to hear about Jesus, and look what was said about them in Acts chapter 4, verse 13. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. I mean, people literally looked at these dudes and said they have no education. They're just ordinary people, but they're living in such a manner. They're so bold, they're so crazy, they're so courageous that even though they're ordinary, they're living their lives in an extraordinary way. And they had to just take note that these men had been with Jesus. And so it's almost like in the back of their mind, they registered, I don't know why they're living this way. They're so bold, they're so courageous, these normal, everyday, average people. Their God just might be real. And in the same way, my hope and prayer is that as people encounter you, people from State Line Church, that they say, you know what, that's just a group of normal people. Everyday people, that's just a group of normal people, but they love so crazily, they live courageously, that they're willing to take chances for Jesus, that, yeah, they're like a group of ordinary people, but there's something so extraordinary about them. There's something different about their lives, that people look at their lives and they take note that you had been with Jesus, that they register that, holy smokes here, there's something about these people. Their God just might be real. Because of the way that they live. They're not buying into cultural lies. They're not living in fear. They're not controlled. They're not puppets. They're just doing something different. They're living in a different way. And so as we close, let me ask you a question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do? Would you take a chance? Would you start something new? Would you start something over? Would you join a small group? Would you ask them out on a date? What would you do if you weren't afraid? Now notice I didn't ask, what would you do if you didn't fail? Look at this quote real quick from Theodore Roosevelt. It says, it's hard to fail, but it's worse never to have tried to succeed. So let me ask you this question. Even if you knew you would fail, what dream should you still go after? What chance should you still take? What lion should you still chase down because you know God is asking you to do it? Too often, we put too much stock in success and failure, in wins and losses. God is not asking you to win or to be successful. God's asking you to be obedient. He is on the hook for the outcomes. We are on the hook for the obedience. God is asking us to have faith and to trust Him and to walk and do what He asks us to do. And I think about State Line Church. You know, when we were starting this church, there were a lot of fears that came up, a lot of hesitations. I had no idea, truthfully, if anyone would even show up when we started this church. I remember debating and wondering, is it really like, God, is this like what you want me to do? And it was clear, crystal clear, without a shadow of a doubt. Greg, I am on the hook for the outcome. You are on the hook for the obedience. I have called you to plant this church. I will build my church. You don't build the church. It's not your church. You're not in charge of this church. Jesus is the head of this church, right? I'll build my church. You don't have to worry about that. You step out in obedience. If no one comes, then you did it. Fine. So we did. We started the church, and people kept coming. People come every single week. They're still here. And here's what this thought goes through my mind. Isn't it that people wouldn't have had their lives impacted if we didn't start this church? Like I said, God will build His church, and God will move in people's lives. This thought went through my head this week as I was preparing this message. I would have missed out on seeing lives impacted. I would have missed out on seeing lives changed. I would have missed out on being a part of this community if I would have let my fears get the best of me. If I would have let the doubters, or if I would have let all the naysayers, if I would have let all this human emotion, these learned conditional things say, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that, you don't need that, don't do that. I was like, well, I got to be obedient and do what God's asked me to do. And listen, I don't want you to miss out because of your fears. I don't want you to look back at one point in your life and regret the opportunities lost, the chances missed, the moments that you knew you should have done something or said something or gone somewhere, whatever it is. I don't want you to miss out and have regret. Know that you have the real lion, the Lion of Judah. He is running with you. So be a people who are courageous, who are willing to face their fears. And so over this next few moments, we're going to connect with Jesus. And for some of you to connect with Jesus, it starts with you finally, maybe for the first time, surrendering your life to Him. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it all figured out. Here's what you need to know, that he died on a cross for you, for the forgiveness of your sins, so you could have a relationship with your Heavenly Father. And if you know that, and you trust that, and you believe that, quit letting fear hold you back. Surrender. Surrender. And let the real Lion come into your story and see then what happens when he starts roaring in your life over all of these other fears. And for others of you, you need to think real long and real hard about what God's asking you to do and decide, are you going to let those moments pass you by? Or are you going to trust that God is going to be with you and you're going to chase after your lion and kill it? Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that you're in this room right now. I pray that you truly speak to every mind, every heart, every soul. Help everybody in this room know without a shadow of a doubt that you're with them, that you're for them, that you have good things in store for them. So as we sing this song, I pray that people have the courage to act. In the name of Jesus, amen.